The inn was quiet in the way embers are quiet, not absent, not fading, but settled comfortably into themselves. The fire no longer danced, it breathed. Each glow rose and fell like a sleeping chest, warm and steady, casting slow light across the stone hearth and the wooden beams above. Shadows gathered where they pleased, stretching and softening, as if even darkness had decided there was nowhere else it needed to be. I, the keeper of stories, rested both hands on the arms of my chair and listened. Not for anything in particular, just listened. Outside, the night had laid its cool palm across the roof and the road beyond it. The wind, if it moved at all, did so without urgency. Somewhere far off, an owl completed a thought and then let it drift away. "Tonight," I said at last, my voice low and unhurried, "we will go somewhere deep." I let the words settle. "Not into danger," I continued gently, "and not into darkness meant to frighten, but into the kind of depth that holds things safely." I adjusted the blanket across my knees and reached for the book beside me, not to open it yet, but simply to feel its familiar weight. "There are mountains in this world," I said, "that sleep easily. They rise and rest without complaint. They bear the passing of seasons without holding too tightly to what has been." I turned my gaze toward the fire. "And then," I added, "there are older mountains. Mountains that remember too much. Mountains that carry centuries the way a deep ocean carries cold, quietly, endlessly, and with great weight. Tonight's story," I said, "is about one such mountain, and about those who care for its dreams." The mountain stood where it had always stood, not sharp or jagged, not dramatic enough to inspire songs at first glance, but broad, ancient, and patient. In spring, water traced gentle paths down its sides, finding old roots carved long before memory. In summer, pines whispered along its slopes, their roots gripping stone with quiet trust. In winter, snow fell not as a burden, but as a blanket, softening edges, muting sound, inviting stillness. Travelers often passed it without remark, but animals knew better. So did the stone beneath their feet, because this mountain dreamed. Most nights those dreams were gentle, memories of warmth and cooling rain, of stars slowly rearranging themselves across eras, of rivers choosing patience over speed. But sometimes, on nights when the air felt heavy and the sky seemed farther away, the mountain's dreams shifted, not into nightmares, just into restlessness. Stone would sigh, deep layers would adjust, searching for comfort the way a sleeper shifts beneath thick blankets. The changes were small, barely noticeable, but enough to ripple upward. Foxes would wake and resettle, birds would tuck their heads deeper beneath wings, and people, miles away, would find themselves turning in bed without knowing why. On those nights, far beneath the roots of trees and the beds of buried streams, lanterns were lit, not hurriedly, not in alarm, but with calm purpose. Lanterns whose flames did not flicker wildly, but glowed with the steadiness of intention. And deep below the mountain, in halls carved not by conquest but by care, the dwarves began their quiet work. The entrance to their world was easily missed. Just a narrow break in stone on the mountain's northern face, half hidden by moss and shadow. Two boulders leaned toward one another there, as if sharing a long conversation. Between them, a slender passage led inward, downward. Those who stepped inside felt the change immediately. The air cooled, sounds softened. Even thoughts seemed to slow, as if the mountain itself were asking for gentleness. Stone steps curved away from the surface world, worn smooth by countless patient feet, and halfway down, set into a small carved niche, waited the first lantern. Its light was not bright. It did not push back the darkness so much as welcome it into something warmer. The flame glowed like honey, steady and calm, as though it had learned long ago that there was no need to hurry. Those who passed it often felt their shoulders drop, their breathing slow, because that lantern meant only one thing: the mountain was being tended. The dwarves who lived beneath the mountain did not call themselves guardians. They did not think in terms of ownership. They were listeners, caretakers, students of stone. They mined, yes, but never greedily. They pressed palms to rock and learned its moods the way one learns weather by scent and silence. They knew which veins of ore could be taken without harm. They knew which stones must be left undisturbed, and they shared an old saying, passed down in murmured tones rather than carved letters. We do not conquer the mountain, we comfort it. Their halls and homes reflected this belief. Walls gently sculpted, straight edges softened by time and intention. Lanterns lined corridors at careful intervals, their light overlapping so no space was left cold or harsh. Tools rested exactly where they had last been set, never abandoned, never rushed. The air smelled faintly of mineral dust, warm oil, and dried herbs hung in small bundles. And beneath it all, always, was the slow, steady presence of the mountain itself, breathing, remembering. Among the dwarves walked one named Brannock Stonehush. He was broad-shouldered, as many dwarves are, but moved with a gentleness that made even loose gravel seem inclined to still itself beneath his boots. His beard was dark as cooled ash, marked by a single streak of silver that caught lantern light like moonshine on smoke. Brannock carried no weapons, only tools: a small mallet whose handle had been worn smooth by patience, a tuning fork shaped for stone rather than air, a brush for clearing dust from runes that had grown tired. Brannock was a rest layer, one who listened for changes in the mountain's dreams, and on this night, as lantern light breathed along the walls, he felt the stone shift. Brannock stopped where he stood. Not abruptly, nothing in the deep halls was done abruptly, but with the gentle stillness of someone pausing to listen for a familiar sound that has changed its note. He placed his palm against the wall. Stone was usually steady beneath his hand, cool and certain, like an old table that never wobbled. But tonight, there was something else. A faint unease, a tiny trembling so subtle it might have been mistaken for imagination, if Brannock had been anyone else. He closed his eyes and listened the way the dwarves listened, not with the ears alone, but with bone and breath and patience. The mountain was shifting in its sleep, not waking, not angry, just searching for comfort. Brannock exhaled slowly through his nose, as if answering the mountain with calm. Then he turned toward the nearest niche where the stone bell rested, carved from a single block, shaped to hold a low note that traveled through rock like warmth through a blanket. He lifted the small striker and rang the bell only once, a single deep tone, not loud, but certain, a message carried through the mountain's bones. Come, quiet work is needed. The sound reached places far away, through corridors where lanterns glowed like resting stars, through chambers where tools lay sleeping in their racks, into small rooms where dwarves had settled into their blankets, their breathing slow, their dreams uncomplicated. No one jolted awake, no one stumbled in panic. Instead, there was a gentle stirring, the calm rising of people who had practiced this routine for generations. Boots were pulled on slowly, lanterns were checked and trimmed, hands rinsed, faces touched with cool water from a stone basin. Frothy ale was poured for all to rouse them for the work at hand. Brannock waited in the gathering hall, where the ceiling arched like a quiet sky of stone. When the first of the night crew arrived, they greeted him with nods rather than questions. They already understood the bell. Elder Coppervale arrived first. Her braids were threaded with thin copper wire that caught the lantern light, and her eyes had the steady sharpness of one who noticed everything without needing to say so. Behind her came Hearn of the Slow Hammer, broad and calm, carrying his mallet the way someone might carry a cup of tea, with care as though it deserved respect. Then Mira Deep Bloom entered, her satchel slung across one shoulder. It was filled with chalks, powders, and small stones etched with runes that looked more like flowing handwriting than symbols of power. They gathered in a half-circle around Brannick. "The mountain is turning in its sleep," Brannick said. That was all. Elder nodded once. "Where does it press?" Brannick tilted his head, listening again, as if the stone itself were speaking in soft knocks. "The west seam," he answered, "near the old fault." Mira adjusted her satchel strap. "Then we'll lay it down again." Hearn's thumb traced the worn handle of his mallet. Slowly. Brannick's mouth softened into the smallest smile. "Yes," he said, voice gentle as lantern glow. "Slowly." They set out. Their lanterns cast overlapping pools of amber light along the corridor. The stone walls drank the warmth and returned it quietly, as if the mountain appreciated the kindness. The path to the west seam was long but familiar. They walked past storerooms stacked with timber and carefully cut blocks of stone, materials not for conquering the mountain, but for bracing it, the way one adds pillows to help a sleeper rest easier. They passed workshops where half-finished carvings sat beneath cloths. Dwarven hands carved many things: bowls, hinges, lantern hooks, small toys for children. But their favorite carvings were always simple shapes, meant to smooth a sharp edge, to soften a corner, to make a space more comfortable. As they walked, Mira paused at a set of runes etched into the wall. She touched them lightly. The symbols were dimmer than they should be, like tired eyes. "They've been working hard," she murmured. Elder leaned closer. "Can you refresh them?" Mira nodded and opened her satchel. From the satchel, Mira took a small pouch of pale dust and a stick of chalk the color of moon milk. With slow, careful strokes, she traced the rune lines, following the old curves rather than forcing new ones. The dust clung to the chalk marks and sank into the stone as if the rock were thirsty. The rune brightened, softly, not sharply, like an ember remembering how to glow. The corridor felt different afterward, not brighter exactly, but calmer. Elder placed her palm against the wall and nodded, satisfied. Hearn lifted his lantern slightly, peering down the passage ahead. Far off, faint as a pulse, the tremble returned, a slow tapping within the rock. Tap, 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 the mountain's uneasy dream. Brannick raised a hand and they stopped. All of them listened. The tapping was not frantic. It was restless, like someone turning over again and again, unable to find the cool side of the pillow. Hearn's shoulders lowered. "All right," he said softly. "We can answer that." They continued, and the corridor widened into a chamber where the ceiling vanished into darkness above. This was the fault chamber. The air here always felt heavier, as though old memories gathered in the stone. Along one wall ran a crack, sealed long ago but visible like a scar on skin. It stretched in a jagged line that reminded Brannick of lightning frozen in place. Nothing dangerous, not tonight. But the mountain's dreams pressed here, tugging gently at the old seam. Fine grit dusted the floor near the crack, fallen from higher ledges. Brannick knelt and placed his palm flat against the stone. Under his hand, the tremble pulsed, steady, persistent. "The dream is deep," he whispered. "Old weight." Mira set her satchel down carefully, as if even the sound of leather against stone should be softened. Elder began inspecting the supports around the chamber's edge, wood beams and stone wedges placed with centuries of knowledge. Hearn stepped toward a stone plate set into the floor, directly in front of the fault. He lifted his mallet and waited. Hearn's waiting was part of his craft. Many could swing a hammer, few could listen with it. He closed his eyes and matched his breath to the tapping in the stone. Tap, tap, tap. When his breath had found the same rhythm, he lifted the mallet a fraction higher and struck, not hard, not sharp, just enough to send a low note through the plate and into the rock beneath. The sound did not echo loudly, it sank downward, a deep hum like the lowest string of a cello held gently. For a moment the mountain's tapping paused, as if surprised to be answered. Then it returned, softer. Tap, tap. Hearn struck again. Tap, a steady heartbeat. Brannick felt the tremble under his palm change, not stop, but loosen, like a clenched hand beginning to open. Elder continued her inspection, tightening a wedge with a careful press. Mira took out chalks, pale blue, soft white, and one that shimmered faintly. She breathed in slowly, then began to draw. Mira's runes were not written like commands. They were written like lullabies. She traced a wide circle around the fault line, her chalk moving in long, unhurried arcs. The line glowed faintly as it formed, not with bright magic, but with a quiet warmth, like sunlight through cloth. Elder placed small anchor stones along the circle, rounded pieces etched with tiny runes that looked like gentle waves. "Blanket weights," Elder murmured, half to herself. Mira smiled. "Exactly." Hearn continued his tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Each strike landed in the same place with the same softness, as though he were comforting the stone rather than shaping it. Brannick kept his palm to the ground, feeling the mountain's pulse. The tremble now seemed to slow between beats. The rock was listening, and perhaps, slowly, trusting. Mira sprinkled a pinch of powdered mineral into the chalk line. The powder sank into the rune, and the circle brightened slightly, like embers fed a careful breath. The chamber felt as though it exhaled. Brannick began to hum, not loudly, just a low vibration in his chest, steady and smooth. Mira joined him, her note higher, soft as steam rising from tea. Elder added a sound that was nearly silent, a breathy tone that seemed to tickle the edges of the rock. Hearn's hammer kept time, tap, tap, tap. Together, they became a gentle answer to the mountain's restless dreaming, a rhythm, a warmth, a reassurance. Brannick felt, under his palm, the old fault line settle. Grit on the floor stopped shifting. The air felt lighter, as if a long-held tension had eased. In the stone, the tapping changed into something slower, deeper, not a restless pulse anymore, more like a sigh. Brannick opened his eyes. The lantern light looked softer now, as though it had been dimmed by peace. "It's turning," he whispered, finding comfort. Hearn struck once more, then stopped, letting silence settle. The silence was not empty, it was full of rest. For a brief moment, Brannick's mind drifted into the mountain's dreaming, not as a vision of images, but as sensation. He felt glaciers moving like slow hands. He felt rivers carving patient lines. He felt stars rearranging themselves across ages so long they did not fit into language. He felt the mountain remembering all it had carried: snow, fire, rain, footsteps, song, silence. Sometimes memory was weight. But tonight, with the runes glowing gently around the fault, memory softened. The weight became warmth. The pressure became calm. Brannick sensed the mountains settle the way a tired traveler settles into a bed that finally feels right. He drew his hand away from the stone. The tremble was gone, not suppressed, not forced, simply finished. Mira dusted chalk from her fingers with slow care. Elder checked the anchor stones one last time. Hearn rested his mallet against his shoulder as though it too had grown pleasantly tired. Brannick nodded. "We leave it now," he said softly. "We let it sleep." They did not hurry away. They walked back the way they came, lanterns held steady. In the fault chamber, the runes continued to glow, faint, warm, comforting, like embers left to guard the night. As they moved down the corridor, the air felt easier. Even their footsteps sounded softer, as if the mountain itself had become more willing to cushion sound. Mira paused at another rune cluster on the wall and traced it with one fingertip. It hummed faintly in response, as though pleased to be acknowledged. Hearn's shoulders lowered with every step. Elder's gaze remained sharp, but it was the sharpness of care, not caution. Brannick walked in the middle of them, calm as a pillar. He listened as he walked, and he heard only what he wanted to hear. No tapping, no tremble, only the deep, steady quiet of stone at rest. They reached a small room set into a bend of the corridor, a resting chamber between tunnels. A long wooden table sat in the center, smooth from use. Benches lined the walls. Shelves held jars of herbs, powders, and dried mushrooms that smelled earthy and comforting. A kettle rested on a stone warmer, and steam curled up in slow spirals. This room was not for celebration. It was for settling, for letting the body remember that it was safe. Mira poured tea into small cups. The tea was pale gold, made from dried mountain flowers and a moss that grew only in quiet places. Elder wrapped both hands around her cup and let the warmth seep into her fingers. Hearn sat heavily but gently, the way a boulder settles into a bed of sand without disturbing it. Brannick stood at the wall for a moment, palm pressed to stone again. This time the stone felt smooth and sure. No restlessness, only the long, slow presence of sleeping mountain. He sat, and they drank without needing to fill the silence. The tea room was quiet in a particular way, not the quiet of emptiness, the quiet of companionship, a quiet with weight and comfort, like a thick blanket laid across the shoulders. Mira watched steam curl from her cup and smiled faintly. Elder stared at the flame beneath the kettle, eyes half-lidded. Hearn's breathing slowed until it matched the subtle rhythm of the warmer's heat. After a time, Elder spoke, voice soft. "Do you ever wonder what it dreams?" She did not need to say, "the mountain." In their world, there was only one thing that could dream so deeply. Brannick considered the question. He took a slow sip, then answered as gently as possible. "Everything it has carried." Mira nodded. "That's a great deal," Hearn murmured, almost to himself. "Then it's good we're here." And again silence returned, comfortable, complete. When they rose, they did so slowly. No one clattered cups. No one scraped benches harshly against the floor. They moved like people who knew the value of quiet. Mira returned jars to their shelves. Elder checked the lantern wicks. Hearn stretched his arms as though loosening the last of the mountain's tension from his shoulders. Brannick paused at the doorway, looking down the corridor. The lantern light made a gentle path ahead, overlapping pools of warmth. He imagined the mountain above them, vast and old, sleeping more easily now, not because it had been forced, but because it had been comforted. He stepped out first, and the others followed. Their footsteps became part of the corridor's calm, and then faded. They returned to the main halls. Here the clan's sleeping quarters branched off like quiet rivers. Doors were half closed, the soft glow of lanterns slipping under them like warm water. From within, the sound of slow breathing, occasional murmurs of dreams. Brannick walked past these doors with care, as though the entire hall were a sleeping creature. He saw a child's carving tucked into a niche, a small stone mountain with closed eyes and a faint smile. Someone long ago had etched tiny runes around it, simple ones, meaning rest and safe and home. Brannick touched the carving lightly with one finger, then continued on. They reached the tool racks. Mira hung her satchel on its hook. Hearn set his mallet into its cradle as though tucking it into bed. Elder took out a slate and chalk. Elder wrote the record the way Dwarves always did. Simple, practical, calm. West seam tended, fault quieted, runes refreshed, dream settled. She blew lightly on the slate to clear the chalk dust and placed it on the shelf where morning eyes would find it. Brannick looked up at the largest lantern in the hall. Its flame was steady, warm, approving. He felt a pleasant tiredness settle through him, not exhaustion, but the kind that comes after meaningful, gentle work. Mira yawned softly behind her hand. Hearn rolled his shoulders once, then let them drop. Elder's eyes softened. No one needed to say anything else. They had done what they came to do, and the mountain was sleeping. Above them, the world had changed in ways no one would notice. Foxes curled deeper into their dens, tails wrapped around noses. Owls tucked their heads beneath wings, satisfied by still air. Snow lay undisturbed on pine branches, and the needles did not shake. In cottages across the valley, people who had been restless turned once, and then stopped, sinking into a deeper, kinder sleep. No one knew to thank the dwarves, and the dwarves required no thanks. Their work was not meant to be seen, only felt, like warmth in a room, like quiet in the bones, like ease arriving without explanation. Deep under the mountain, lanterns continued to glow, steady as patience, soft as a promise. And if you are listening now, perhaps you know something about carrying weight. Perhaps your thoughts have been shifting and settling, like stone trying to find a comfortable place. If so, imagine this. Imagine a warm lantern in the dark, not bright, not harsh, just enough to soften the edges. Imagine careful footsteps in a quiet hall. Imagine steady hands, slow work, gentle tools, a mallet that taps not to break but to soothe. Tap, 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 like a heartbeat that tells the body it is safe. Let that rhythm settle into your breathing. Slow in, slow out. Imagine your worries as a fault line, not something broken, only something old, something that sometimes needs a little extra care. Imagine soft runes being drawn around it, circles of comfort, lines of reassurance. Imagine anchor stones placed like blanket weights, here and here and here, not to hold you down, but to help you feel held. The room around you becomes quieter, the air becomes softer, your shoulders begin to drop, your jaw unclenches, your hands loosen. The mind, like the mountain, turns slowly toward a more comfortable place. There is no hurry, no need to solve anything tonight, only to rest. The lantern light fades, and slowly, gently, we return. The mountain rests now, far away and deep beneath the world, but the warmth of its quiet lingers. Here, the inn waits for us. The hearth has burned low again, embers glowing like small, patient stars beneath a veil of ash. The walls hold their warmth without effort, and the night beyond the windows has gone still, as if listening. I, the keeper of stories, close the book with care, though it makes hardly a sound. This, I say softly, more to the fire than to you, is why the dwarves work in silence. Not to be known, not to be praised, but because even the heaviest things, mountains, memories, long days, need tending now and then. I let the words rest. The mountain did not need to be changed, I continue, only comforted. And neither, I add gently, do you. The fire sighs, the inn holds steady. And so, I whisper, we lay the day down, the way the dwarves lay the mountain down, with patience, warmth, and care. There is nothing more you need to do, only rest. The embers glow, the story ends, and sleep may come easily now. Good night. If you find yourself not quite ready to leave the fire, there is another tale waiting for you. It rests just nearby, quiet and unhurried. You may click it now and let the story carry you a little further into rest.